During the 2022 Oscars, Will Smith shocked everybody by walking up on stage and hitting Chris Rock across the face before returning to his seat and yelling profanities. The joke that was made by Chris Rock referred to the 1997 Demi Moore movie G.I. Jane, where the actress shaved her head. Jada, who is Will Smith's wife, has recently become an advocate and facilitated a lot of dialogue surrounding her struggles with alopecia, which has resulted in her losing her hair. The Los Angeles Police Department have said that they are aware of the incident that has occurred, however there's been no official report filed. Chris Rock has publicly said that he does not wish to press charges against Will Smith for the incident. So that raises the question, can you withdraw a criminal charge in Australia, and can the victim choose whether to proceed? It is important to note that criminal charges are brought before the court by the police who act for the Crown. The victim of any criminal offence in Australia does not have the power to decide whether criminal charges will be laid. If you commit a criminal offence, it is technically an offence that is committed against the Crown. Therefore, it is up to the police and the prosecution to decide whether it is appropriate to proceed with the charges. The prosecution ultimately has the authority to drop charges at any time after the criminal proceedings have commenced. Making representations and participating in negotiations to withdraw or reduce the criminal charge often occurs between the prosecution and the defence. At this point, the victim is sometimes consulted by police, however, the ultimate decision lies with the police. The prosecution must review the prospects of success in bringing a case before the court. This involves looking at the strength of the available evidence. The prosecution can discontinue proceedings if the evidence against the defendant is considered insufficient in establishing the charges beyond reasonable doubt, or when it is no longer considered to be in the public's interest to continue with the charges. Police have a general policy under the New South Wales Police Domestic and Family Violence Code of Practice to not drop charges in relation to domestic violence. This policy intends to protect victims by looking at the emotional and psychological effects that domestic violence can have on victims, and further notes the cycle of violence that often ensues. Often victims feel the need to protect their abusers despite being subject to this violence and despite the danger they are in. Without the protection that the policy intends to award, there could be the potential for an abuser to manipulate the victim into dropping the charges. The police recognises this risk and hopes to break the cycle of violence. This brings us to the question of what other differences there are between the American and Australian justice systems. Well, the first one we're going to look at is police power. In America, police must establish probable cause before searching, arresting, or charging a person with a criminal offence, and that is embodied in the US Fourth Amendment to the US Constitution. By contrast, in Australia, police need to show a reasonable suspicion in order to perform a lawful arrest or search. This is a much lower test than the probable cause in the US. In the US, there's also a right to silence, which is located in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. In Australia, we do not have rights embedded in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. Rights are simply protected through legislation and common law. The right to silence is not as simple as the US and is contained in a complex piece of legislation. It is therefore very important that before you speak to police, you obtain independent legal advice in relation to your rights and your obligations. Another major difference is in relation to bail. America is known for grants of monetary bail, and it appears by the popularity of shows like Bounty Hunter that this is a more common occurrence than in Australia. In New South Wales, the Bail Act stipulates that they must show cause as to whether their detention is not justified and prove that they are not an unacceptable risk to the community before being granted bail. This intends to promote a higher level of justice in relation to socio-economic wealth in society, that the rich should not be seen as more innocent than in the eyes of the law than the poor. The court has a range of conditions available to impose on the accused, for example, house arrest and ankle bracelet monitoring, surrender of passport, rewarding conditions, for example, and it is ultimately a decision for the courts.